Homeless boy helps Donald Trump. Next day, he gets the shock of his life. Sleeping on a park bench with nothing but the clothes on his back. Ethan thought his life was over. But when he stumbled upon a wallet belonging to none other than Donald Trump, he had no idea that returning it would lead to the biggest shock of his life. The biting winter air cut through the tattered layers of Ethan's jacket as he trudged down the icy pathways of Central Park. His sneakers, soles worn thin from months of wandering, scraped softly against the frosted gravel. Ethan's life had become a series of repetitive rituals. Scavenge for scraps, avoid the pitying stares of strangers, and pray that the night wouldn't bring another frostbite warning. The park was his sanctuary, a place where he could disappear into the backdrop of the city that barely noticed his existence. This morning seemed no different. The city stirred slowly, its familiar sounds of honking taxis and distant chatter muted by the blanket of snow. Ethan's stomach growled, a low, insistent reminder of how long it had been since his last meal. He crouched near a park bench, hoping to find an abandoned snack or loose change. Instead, something far more unusual caught his eye, a sleek, black leather wallet poking out from beneath the bench. His heart pounded as he snatched it up, his trembling fingers fumbling with the clasp. The weight of the wallet was undeniable, promising treasures inside. He opened it cautiously, his breath hitching when he caught sight of its contents. Crisp $100 bills, stacked neatly in one compartment, and a collection of credit cards gleaming like a jackpot in another. But it was the ID card that stopped Ethan cold. Donald J. Trump. The name burned into his brain like a neon sign. For a moment, he stared at the wallet, as if expecting it to vanish into thin air. The face on the ID was unmistakable. The man whose name was plastered across the city, on skyscrapers and billboards. The man who, as far as Ethan was concerned, might as well have been from another planet. This was no ordinary find. This wallet was a lifeline. The money inside could feed him for months, even get him off the streets entirely. His mind raced with possibilities. Warm clothes, a place to sleep, maybe even a chance to start over. But then came the voice, his mother's voice, etched into his memories like a sermon carved in stone. Do what's right, no matter how hard it is. Ethan clenched his jaw, his pulse hammering in his ears. What did right even mean in a world that had done him so wrong? He glanced around the park. There were no witnesses, no cameras, just the quiet crunch of a jogger's footsteps in the distance. The wallet felt heavy in his hands, not just from the cash, but from the weight of the decision it represented. With a deep breath, Ethan snapped the wallet shut and stuffed it into his pocket. He marched toward the nearest park officer, his heart pounding louder with each step. The officer raised an eyebrow as Ethan hesitantly held out the wallet. I found this, Ethan said, his voice shaky but resolute. It belongs to, well, you can see who it belongs to. The officer's expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment as he opened the wallet and saw the ID. Donald Trump? He muttered, giving Ethan a skeptical look. Kid, are you sure you want to hand this over? There's a lot of cash in here. Ethan nodded, though the ache of hunger made him want to scream. It's not mine, he said simply. I wanted to do the right thing. The officer studied him for a long moment before nodding. You did good, kid. I'll make sure this gets back to him. He jotted down Ethan's name and the number of a payphone Ethan sometimes used, though Ethan doubted he'd ever hear anything more about it. As Ethan walked away, his stomach grumbled louder than before. He hadn't just given up a wallet. He'd given up a way out. Part of him wanted to curse his own stupidity, but another part, the quieter, steadier part, felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a ghost haunting the city. He felt human. The day dragged on in its usual monotony, with Ethan wandering the park aimlessly, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger that hollowed out his insides. By sunset, the city was bathed in a golden glow, the kind of beauty Ethan rarely stopped to appreciate. He found a familiar bench and settled down for the night, the cold steps beneath him offering little comfort. Little did Ethan know his life was about to change forever. The next morning arrived with the same chaos as any other day in New York. Honking cars, pigeons cooing, and the steady rhythm of joggers pounding the pathways. Ethan rubbed his hands together, trying to stave off the morning chill. He couldn't shake the strange mixture of regret and pride that had followed him through the night. Had he made the right choice? Did it even matter? As he sat on the park bench, soaking in a rare patch of sunlight, a man approached. He was out of place among the joggers and dog walkers, dressed in a sharp black suit and carrying an air of authority. Ethan straightened instinctively, unsure whether to stay or run. "Are you Ethan?" the man asked, his voice calm but commanding. Ethan froze. How did this guy know his name? He nodded cautiously. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. He handed it to Ethan, who squinted at the embossed gold letters. Trump Organization. "Mr. Trump would like to meet you," the man said, his tone professional but not unkind. "He was very impressed by your honesty in returning his wallet." Ethan's jaw nearly hit the ground. "Why?" he stammered. "I mean, I didn't do anything special. I just returned what wasn't mine." "That's exactly why," the man replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Not everyone would have made the same choice. Ethan sat in stunned silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. For a brief second, he wondered if this was some kind of elaborate prank. But the man's demeanor was too serious, too precise to be anything but genuine. "Can you come to Trump Tower this afternoon?" the man asked. Ethan nodded before he even realized he'd made the decision. That afternoon, Ethan stood outside Trump Tower, craning his neck to take in the gleaming structure that loomed above him. The building's golden facade reflected the afternoon sunlight, making it look almost otherworldly. Ethan felt like an imposter, a street rat trespassing in a palace. The lobby was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Marble floors that seemed to stretch for miles, golden accents gleaming from every surface, and a faint scent of fresh flowers that felt completely foreign to Ethan's senses. He approached the receptionist nervously, clutching the business card like a lifeline. "You must be Ethan," she said, offering a polite smile. "Mr. Trump is expecting you." Before he could respond, Ethan was whisked away to a private elevator. As it ascended higher and higher, his ears popped slightly from the altitude. When the doors finally slid open, he found himself in an opulent office suite. Walls adorned with photos of Trump shaking hands with world leaders and celebrities, polished furniture, and a breathtaking view of Manhattan that made Ethan's knees weak. And then there he was. Donald Trump entered the room with an air of confidence that filled every corner. Dressed in a tailored suit and his signature tie, he extended a hand toward Ethan. "You're the young man who found my wallet," he said, his voice both commanding and warm. Ethan shook his hand awkwardly, his nerves turning his grip clumsy. "Yes, sir," he replied, barely above a whisper. I wanted to make sure it got back to you." Trump studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Ethan's surprise, he smiled. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did. It takes character to do the right thing when no one's watching." Ethan felt his cheeks flush with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "It wasn't anything special," he mumbled. Trump leaned back in his chair, motioning for Ethan to sit. "Tell me about yourself," he said, his tone curious but firm. "What brought you to that bench in Central Park?" Ethan hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Still, there was something about Trump's demeanor that made him feel oddly safe, as if this man genuinely wanted to hear his story. Slowly, haltingly, Ethan began to speak. Ethan swallowed hard, his fingers gripping the edge of the plush leather chair beneath him. "Well, it's a long story," he started, his voice uncertain. He glanced at the towering figure of Donald Trump sitting across from him, eyes sharp yet strangely inviting. "I grew up here in the city," Ethan continued, his gaze drifting toward the panoramic view of Manhattan stretching out beyond the massive windows. "My mom worked 2 jobs trying to keep things together, but when she got sick, everything fell apart. The bills piled up, and eventually we lost our apartment." Trump leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished desk. "That's tough," he said, his voice carrying a weight of understanding that surprised Ethan. "And since then?" Ethan exhaled slowly, the memories hitting him like a freight train. "I've been in and out of shelters. Sometimes I crash with friends, But eventually, those options ran out too. He hesitated, his voice quieter now. Central Park, it became home. It's not much, but at least it's mine. For a moment, Trump didn't respond. He simply studied Ethan, his gaze intense but not judgmental. Then he sat back, nodding slightly. You know, Ethan, I meet a lot of people. Successful people. Wealthy people. But let me tell you something. Character isn't built in comfort. It's built in moments like the one you faced when you found that wallet. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. I did what my mom would have wanted me to do, he muttered. Trump smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. And that's exactly why you're sitting here, kid. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk before continuing. I think people like you deserve a shot, a real shot. Ethan blinked. What do you mean? Trump stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the bustling streets below. I want to help you. He turned back to face Ethan. Starting today, you're not sleeping on a park bench anymore. Ethan's mouth fell open. Wait, what? Trump smirked. I've got an apartment lined up for you. Nothing fancy, but it's warm, safe, and stocked with food. And your mom, she's going to have a job at one of my hotels. Something steady. Something real. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Are you serious? He stammered, disbelief washing over him in waves. Dead serious, Trump said, leaning down slightly. But listen, kid, this isn't a handout. This is a hand up. You've got potential, and I'm going to make sure you use it. Ethan swallowed the lump forming in his throat. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. I don't know what to say, he finally whispered. Say yes, Trump said with a grin. The rest we'll figure out. Ethan's head bobbed in a slow nod, his hands shaking slightly. Yes, he said, barely believing the words leaving his mouth. Later that day, Ethan stood in the doorway of his new apartment, the key trembling in his grasp. The place wasn't huge, but compared to the cold park benches he'd grown used to, it felt like a palace. A real bed, clean sheets, a small kitchen stocked with food. It was everything he'd dreamed of but never dared to hope for. He walked inside, his fingers trailing across the countertop, the reality of it all sinking in. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a new beginning. Then came the knock at the door. Ethan hesitated, then cautiously opened it. His breath caught in his throat as he saw his mother standing there, eyes wide with disbelief and tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom! Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. Oh, Ethan, she murmured. I thought I lost you. Ethan clung to her tightly, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. We're okay now, Mom, he whispered. We're really okay. In the days that followed, Ethan struggled to adjust to his new reality. Having a warm place to sleep, a fridge full of food, and a mother who wasn't battling the streets for survival felt surreal. But along with comfort came challenges, ones he wasn't entirely prepared for. Trump had arranged for him to attend a prestigious private school covering all expenses, including books and uniforms. The first day, as Ethan stood outside the towering building, his stomach knotted with nerves. Inside, everything felt foreign. The polished floors, the crisp uniforms, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever he walked by. Isn't he the kid Trump helped? Someone whispered as he passed. He doesn't belong here, another voice murmured. Ethan clenched his fists, keeping his head down. He could feel the weight of their stares, their skepticism pressing into him like a physical force. He didn't belong here. Not yet. But he wouldn't let that stop him. The first few weeks were tough. Lunchtimes were the worst, as he often sat alone, pushing food around his tray while whispers buzzed around him like angry bees. The pressure to prove himself gnawed at him constantly. But he was determined. Slowly, he threw himself into his studies, determined to silence the doubts, both his own and everyone else's. One afternoon, as he sat alone, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Hey, you're Ethan, right? Ethan looked up to see a boy standing there, dressed in the same uniform, but with an easy smile. Yeah, Ethan said cautiously. I'm James, the boy said, plopping down across from him. I think what you did was pretty cool. Not everyone would have given that wallet back. Ethan shrugged. I just did what felt right. James grinned. Well, not everyone does. Welcome to the school, man. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. Months passed, and Ethan slowly found his place. He studied harder than ever before, taking advantage of every opportunity Trump had given him. But the biggest challenge wasn't just fitting in, it was staying true to himself. At one of Trump's high-profile networking events, Ethan found himself surrounded by business moguls and politicians. He felt out of place in the rented suit, but Trump's words echoed in his mind. Confidence is key. Walking like you belong. As the night wore on, a well-dressed man approached him with a sly smile. Ethan, right? Heard a lot about you. Ethan nodded politely. The man leaned in. You've got access to Trump. That's power, kid. And power's worth a lot to the right people. He slid a card across the table. Think about it. Ethan stared at the card for a long moment before pushing it back. I don't do that, he said firmly. The man's smile faded. Suit yourself. Later, when Ethan recounted the encounter to Trump, the businessman nodded approvingly. Good call, kid. Remember, integrity lasts longer than any quick buck. And for the first time in his life, Ethan truly believed that doing the right thing always paid off. Ethan's life began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings at school, afternoons studying, and evenings spent at his apartment with his mom, who was finally smiling again after years of hardship. The transition wasn't easy. There were still whispers in the hallways, still moments where he felt like an outsider looking in. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself why he was here. This is my shot. I can't waste it. But the challenges didn't stop coming. One evening, after a long day at school, Ethan found himself walking through the bustling streets of Manhattan. The city, once cold and indifferent, now felt like it was full of possibility. As he passed by a sleek cafe window, he caught his reflection, still the same scruffy kid underneath the polished uniform, but with a glint of determination in his eyes. Just as he turned the corner, a voice rang out from behind him. Ethan, is that you? He spun around to see a familiar face, Mr. Carter, a man he'd known from his days on the streets. Mr. Carter had always looked out for him, offering scraps of food and bits of wisdom when life felt unbearable. But now, the older man looked even worse than Ethan remembered, his clothes more tattered, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. Ethan's heart clenched. Mr. Carter, I didn't expect to see you here. Carter's gaze swept over Ethan's clean-cut appearance, his lips curling into a smile. Look at you, kid. Moving up in the world, huh? There was no bitterness in his voice, just a weary sense of pride. Ethan shifted awkwardly. Yeah, things have changed a little. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, pressing it into Carter's palm. Here for now. I'll do more soon, I promise. Carter looked down at the money, shaking his head. You've already done more than you know, Ethan. Just seeing you like this, it gives the rest of us hope. He patted Ethan's shoulder. Don't forget where you came from, kid. Ethan swallowed hard. I won't. That night, Ethan sat in his apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. The memory of Mr. Carter's weary face wouldn't leave him. He had been given so much. How could he just sit here and enjoy it while people he once called family were still struggling? The next day, during his weekly check-in at Trump Tower, Ethan found himself pacing nervously outside the billionaire's office. When Trump finally called him in, Ethan wasted no time. Mr. Trump, I want to do something. For the homeless. Ethan blurted out before he could lose his nerve. Trump leaned back in his chair, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. That's so. Ethan nodded firmly. I know what it's like out there. People think being homeless is just about being hungry, but it's more than that. It's losing hope. He took a deep breath. I want to give them hope, like you gave me. For a moment, Trump said nothing. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. You're thinking like a leader, kid. He steepled his fingers, considering. All right, let's make it happen. Ethan's eyes widened. Really? Trump nodded. You're the one with the experience. Put together a plan, find out what they need, and I'll back you. Ethan threw himself into the project with everything he had. He spent weeks visiting shelters, talking to people he used to sleep next to on park benches, and gathering insights on what would actually help. With Trump's connections and resources, Ethan was able to organize a massive charity event, the Second Chance Initiative. The event was unlike anything Ethan had ever been part of. Business leaders, philanthropists, and media personalities flooded the grand ballroom, all gathered to hear him speak. Dressed in a borrowed suit, Ethan stood nervously at the podium, his hands trembling. He took a deep breath. "My name is Ethan, and not too long ago, I was sleeping on park benches just a few blocks from here." The crowd fell silent. I thought I was invisible, just another face lost in the city. But one moment of honesty changed everything for me. He glanced toward the back of the room, where Trump stood with his arms crossed, watching with an approving nod. "I was given a second chance," Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "And I believe everyone deserves the same. Not just shelter, but opportunity. A way out." The applause that followed was thunderous. But the most meaningful moment came when Ethan spotted Mr. Carter in the crowd, tears in his tired eyes. After the event, Trump pulled Ethan aside, clapping him on the back. "You did good, kid," he said with a rare note of pride in his voice. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're making a difference." Ethan felt something swell in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. As he walked out of Trump Tower that night, he realized something. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. He wasn't just some homeless kid who got lucky anymore. He was someone who could create change, and he wasn't going to stop until he did. In the months that followed, Ethan's life continued to evolve. His foundation grew, expanding to provide job training and housing assistance. He became a fixture at business events, learning everything he could about leadership and using his new platform to push for real change. But with success came scrutiny. Critics online questioned whether his story was genuine, claiming it was all a publicity stunt. Just another PR move, they sneered on social media. Ethan tried to ignore it, but the whispers started creeping into his thoughts. Did he really deserve all of this? Or was he just a pawn in a bigger game? One evening, he found himself in Trump's office again, voicing his concerns. "People are saying I don't deserve this, that I'm just here because of you." Trump leaned back, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Let me tell you something, Ethan," he said. "People will always talk. They'll question you, doubt you, try to tear you down. But success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right." Ethan nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. He wasn't just living this life for himself anymore. He was living it for every person out there who needed hope. As the years passed, Ethan's story became legendary. He went from a homeless teen to a respected entrepreneur and advocate, standing behind the podium at yet another high-profile event. He gazed out at the audience and spoke with the confidence he never thought he'd have. "My story started with a wallet," he said, his voice steady. "But it's not about the wallet. It's about what you do when no one's watching. It's about character." And in the front row, Donald Trump sat, nodding with a proud smile. Ethan's journey was far from over. With every new milestone he reached, new challenges emerged. Balancing school, his growing nonprofit, and the pressure of living up to Trump's expectations was no easy feat. The whispers of doubt from critics never truly faded. But Ethan had learned to drown them out with action. One brisk autumn morning, as he sat in his modest but comfortable apartment, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Ethan speaking," he said cautiously. A deep voice responded, "Mr. Ethan, this is Harold Green from the Manhattan Youth Empowerment Council. We've been following your work with the Second Chance Initiative, and we'd like to invite you to speak at our upcoming gala." Ethan nearly dropped the phone. The Manhattan Youth Empowerment Council was one of the city's most prestigious organizations. Speaking at their event meant rubbing shoulders with some of the most influential figures in philanthropy. It was a chance to expand his reach, to turn his dream of helping others into something even bigger. I'd be honored," he stammered, barely able to contain his excitement. "Great," Green replied. "I'll have my assistant send over the details. We're looking forward to hearing your story." Ethan hung up, staring at his reflection in the window. The boy who once slept under those very streets was now being asked to speak at an event filled with millionaires and changemakers. He exhaled sharply. "You can do this," he whispered to himself. The night of the gala arrived faster than he expected. As he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the sleek navy blue suit Trump's team had provided, doubt gnawed at the edges of his confidence. Would they take him seriously? Would they see him as nothing more than a charity case elevated by Trump's influence? His mother stepped into the room, watching him with pride. "You look good, sweetheart," she said softly. "You've come so far." Ethan smiled, her words grounding him. "Thanks, Mom. I don't want to mess this up." She took his hands in hers, squeezing them gently. "You won't. Just be yourself." The gala venue was a stunning ballroom draped in golden chandeliers and elegant decor. Ethan stepped through the grand entrance, feeling the weight of the event pressed down on his shoulders. Conversations buzzed around him. Words like funding, investment, and strategic impact floated through the air like a foreign language. As he scanned the crowd, his eyes landed on a familiar figure, Trump himself, effortlessly commanding a circle of business elites. When their eyes met, Trump gave him a small nod, a silent encouragement. Ethan took a deep breath and approached the stage. The room fell silent as he stood behind the podium, the bright lights casting long shadows on the gleaming floors. "My name is Ethan," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "A year ago, I was sleeping on a park bench, unsure if I'd survive another winter. But one act of honesty, one decision to do the right thing, changed my life." He glanced around the room, locking eyes with influential figures who, just months ago, wouldn't have given him a second glance. "I'm not here because of luck. I'm here because of opportunity. Because someone believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." The applause was deafening, but Ethan barely heard it. All he could focus on was the sense of validation swelling inside him. For the first time, he truly felt like he belonged. After the gala, Ethan found himself surrounded by potential donors, mentors, and even a few skeptics who now looked at him with newfound respect. As he shook hands and exchanged business cards, he realized something important. This wasn't just about his story anymore. It was about creating real change. One man, an older gentleman with sharp blue eyes and a crisp suit, approached him with a smile. "Ethan, I've been in this business for a long time, and I can tell when someone has the drive to make a difference. Have you ever considered expanding your initiative beyond New York?" Ethan's mind raced. He had dreamed of it, but hearing it from someone so established made it feel possible. "I'd love to," he admitted, "but I don't even know where to start." The man handed him a sleek card. "Let's talk. I think we can help each other." Ethan pocketed the card, his heart pounding with excitement. Every moment felt like another door opening. In the weeks that followed, things moved fast. Meetings, partnerships, and expansion plans filled Ethan's days. He traveled to different states, visiting shelters and talking to young people who reminded him of his past self. Each conversation reinforced his belief that second chances weren't just for him. They were for anyone willing to take them. Despite the success, the pressure began to mount. Balancing school, media appearances, and his growing nonprofit left him exhausted. One evening, as he sat in his office, staring at the endless to-do list in front of him, his phone buzzed with a message from Trump. "Remember, Ethan, focus on what matters most. Don't let the noise distract you." Ethan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Trump's words always had a way of cutting through the chaos. What mattered most? It wasn't the fame or the attention. It was the people he was helping. Months later, Ethan found himself back where it all began, Central Park. The winter air nipped at his face, but this time, he wasn't seeking shelter. He was there for something else. He spotted Mr. Carter sitting on the same bench where they'd last talked. "Hey, Mr. Carter," Ethan said with a grin as he sat down beside him. Carter looked him over, nodding approvingly. "You look good, kid." Ethan pulled out a small envelope and handed it to him. "It's not much, but it's enough to get you into housing for a few months. We're working on something long-term." Carter stared at the envelope, his hands trembling. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ethan replied, echoing Trump's words from that fateful day. "The rest we'll figure out." Carter chuckled, wiping a tear from his eye. "Proud of you, kid. Real proud." As Ethan walked away from the park that night, He felt a sense of fulfillment that no fancy gala or business meeting could ever give him. This was why he was doing it. This was what mattered. Looking up at the towering skyline, he smiled. He wasn't just a homeless kid who got lucky. He was a leader, a change maker, and most importantly, someone who had never forgotten where he came from. And this was only the beginning. Ethan's story had come full circle. From a homeless teenager surviving on the cold benches of Central Park to a young leader creating change, his journey had been anything but ordinary. He had faced doubt, struggled with identity, and carried the weight of expectations. But through it all, one thing remained constant: his unwavering determination to do the right thing. With each passing day, his nonprofit, the Second Chance Initiative, grew larger. What started as a small effort to help those he once called neighbors had turned into a movement spanning across multiple cities. Shelters were being funded, job training programs were launching, and stories of hope were emerging from places Ethan once thought were hopeless. Despite the success, Ethan never forgot where he came from. One cold evening, he found himself back in Central Park, standing near the very bench where his life had changed forever. The familiar chill in the air no longer felt like a threat, but a reminder of how far he had come. He sat down, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, lost in thought. "Didn't think I'd see you here again, kid." A raspy voice cut through the silence. Ethan looked up to see Mr. Carter, his old friend from the streets, bundled up in layers, his eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. Ethan smiled and patted the bench beside him. "Figured I'd drop by," he said. "This place, it reminds me of where it all started." Carter nodded slowly, studying Ethan with a knowing look. "You've done good for yourself," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you still you, right?" Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, still me." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, pressing it into Carter's weathered hands. "This should help with housing for the next few months. And I want you to come work with me. Help others like us." Carter's eyes widened, and for a moment, he just stared at the envelope. Then, with a trembling hand, he clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Proud of you, kid. Real proud." Ethan swallowed the lump forming in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. As they sat in comfortable silence, Ethan realized that success wasn't just about the applause or the opportunities he had been given. It was about what he did with them. A few weeks later, Ethan found himself back at Trump Tower, seated across from the man who had set his journey in motion. Trump leaned back in his chair, his signature smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "So, you're making waves, huh? I hear good things." Ethan smiled. "Try my best, sir. Just trying to make it count." Trump nodded, tapping his fingers against the desk. "That's the right mindset. You're not just some kid off the streets anymore. You're building something real. But listen," he leaned in, his gaze intense, "success isn't about how high you climb. It's about how many people you bring up with you." Ethan nodded, those words hitting him harder than he expected. "I get it now," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't just my story anymore." Trump grinned. "Exactly. And remember, the higher you go, the louder the critics get. Just focus on what matters." Ethan stood up, shaking Trump's hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Trump, for everything." Trump's smirk softened. "Don't thank me, Ethan. Just keep proving me right." Years passed, and Ethan's name became synonymous with hope. He traveled across the country, speaking to schools, businesses, and communities about resilience, honesty, and second chances. His foundation grew beyond his wildest dreams, and he never stopped working to make life better for those who needed it most. But despite the success, the cameras, and the media attention, Ethan remained grounded. He knew that it all came down to that moment in the park, the moment he chose integrity over desperation. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan found himself staring out over the Manhattan skyline from his office. The city no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like home. He smiled, thinking back to the scared boy he used to be and the man he had become. Suddenly his phone buzzed. It was a message from Trump. "Proud of you, kid. Keep going." Ethan exhaled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't done yet. There were still stories to change, lives to impact, and hope to spread. And this was only the beginning. Ethan's journey teaches us that integrity and kindness are the true currencies of life. In a world where desperation often leads people down dark paths, Ethan's decision to return that wallet, despite his own struggles, serves as a powerful reminder that doing the right thing can open doors we never imagined. His story proves that opportunities don't just come to those who wait. They come to those who are willing to act with honesty and courage, even when no one is watching. From the cold benches of Central Park to the grand halls of Trump Tower, Ethan's life changed because of one simple choice: choosing integrity over temptation. But perhaps the greatest lesson Ethan's story offers is the power of giving back. Success is not just measured by personal achievements, but by how many people we help along the way. Ethan didn't just escape homelessness. He turned his experience into a mission to uplift others, proving that our past does not define us, but our actions do. No matter where we come from, every one of us has the power to create change, to inspire, and to remind the world that second chances are real, and they can lead to extraordinary things.